sorry to say it, but notwithstanding your excellent Mr. Bingley, I've never been so happy to leave a place in my life.
Pride and Prejudice continues here on BBC One next week, again at 9 o'clock, with a repeat starting on BBC Two next Saturday at 6:10. The BBC hardback book of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice is available now from bookshops.
1917, and the Russian Empire crumbles under the weight of revolution.
What I liked was the promise of a happy, classless society in the future.
But popular hopes turn to uncomfortable realities.
It was said Stalin's ovations were so long because nobody dared to be seen as the first to stop clapping.
The struggle to create a new Russia. The Universal Made Personal in People's Century. Wednesday at 10 on BBC One.
Fame and fortune couldn't satisfy American baseball legend Babe Ruth. John Goodman stars on BBC Two in 10 minutes. Here on BBC One in 15 minutes, Frank Skinner applies a liberal coating of the unusual to everyday matters.
He fought in the Gulf War, but it's his children who got the injuries.
They're my children, and it's passed from me through Paula onto the kids.
She was a doctor in the Gulf War, but it's her baby who bears the scars.
We didn't know what was wrong with our baby, but we thought she might be blind.
So what's caused these defects? And why is there a wall of official silence? The Gulf War Babies. Panorama, your world in view. Every Monday, 9:30 on BBC One.
Now the evening news from the BBC with Peter Sissons. It's 5 to 10.
Israel and the PLO agree at last on the terms for a massive expansion in Palestinian self-rule. 16 months of negotiations end with the PLO claiming they'll control 90% of the occupied territories. A mass murder in southern France. A teenager goes berserk and kills 11 people, then himself. And Europe recapture the Ryder Cup. Good evening. Israel has finally signed away much of its 28-year occupation of the West Bank of the River Jordan in the interests of Middle East peace. The PLO call it the basis for a Palestinian state. Israel has talked to people born in the same cradle, agreeing on a new future. The landmark agreement, more than a year late and reached after final, tortuous negotiations, will be signed officially at the White House on Thursday. Under the deal, Palestinian control will be greatly extended beyond the Gaza Strip and Jericho, where they've taken over already. Within 6 months, Israeli troops will pull out of 6 West Bank cities and hundreds of villages. But in Hebron, a small Israeli force will remain to protect Jewish settlers. Thousands of Palestinian prisoners will start being released after the agreement is signed.
Hebron and the West Bank, north and south.
Until a short time before their assistants initialed the agreement, Yasser Arafat and Shimon Peres were still negotiating, trying not to miss their latest deadline at sunset, the start of the Jewish New Year holiday. They succeeded with only a few hours to spare. Both men have staked everything on this. They couldn't afford another failure.
It is a historic choice, a moral choice, an extended hand to the future, an extended hand to our neighbors.
There was as much relief as triumph.
For this we have spent all these nights and days. Look how many papers.
This is the latest stage of the process that started on the White House lawn 2 years ago. The Israeli pullout from Gaza and Jericho in May last year was until now its most tangible achievement. There'll be other withdrawals from towns on the West Bank over the next 6 months to allow Palestinian elections. The biggest issue, the future of Jerusalem, which both sides want as their capital, won't be touched until the final stage of negotiations, which is due to start by next May. Hebron, sacred to Muslims and Jews, has been the toughest problem in this round of talks. Today, Jewish settlers prayed at the Cave of the Patriarchs, the burial place of the prophet Abraham, where they believe the Jewish state began. The removal of settlements won't be discussed until the final negotiations, but Hebron's 400 Jews believe their government wants today's agreement to drive them out.
They're hoping to see us, run for dear life. We're not going to run.
The Federman family believe they will have to fight to stay here.
No one will rule really Hebron. Only two sides will be in their areas and try to attack each other and try to achieve more and more points.
Are you expecting bloodshed?
I won't be surprised if there's going to be a bloodshed.
Some Israeli soldiers will stay, but they may not be able to keep the two sides apart. The agreement they initialed today stands or falls here. If it's strong enough to work in Hebron, it will probably work everywhere. But if they can't make it stick in this city, the whole process could still collapse. There was more violence in the West Bank town of Nablus today. Israeli soldiers shot dead a Palestinian youth. This latest agreement will only work if it makes both sides feel safer. To stop that happening, extremists on both sides will try to prolong the killing, to wreck the best hope this region has had for peace in generations. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, on the West Bank.
A teenager said to have had a fascination with Hitler has shot dead 8 people after opening fire at random in a town in the south of France. Another 7 people were seriously wounded in the incident at Cuers, near Marseille, before the teenager killed himself. 3 members of the boy's family were found beaten to death.
All through the day, police in the village of Cuers have been piecing together the story of how the gunman moved through the streets early this morning, firing at random and pausing frequently to reload. The trail of killing began late last night in his family home nearby, where the teenager, said by his neighbours to be quiet and withdrawn, battered his mother, stepfather and half-brother to death. When he reached Cuers, armed with a hunting rifle, his first victim was a pensioner out walking her dog. He was very calm, said this eyewitness, but he was firing at everything that moved. He took his time too. He wasn't hurrying. The bodies of the dead were taken to a makeshift mortuary in the village sports hall, and emergency services have now offered counselling to their families. Police say they still have no idea why the attack was carried out. Kevin Connolly, BBC News, Paris.
The Bosnian President, Alija Izetbegovic, announced tonight that his government won't attend this week's peace talks in New York. He's reported to have withdrawn because he says the Bosnian Serbs have failed to respond positively to his proposals. Our diplomatic correspondent Nicholas Witchell joins us now from Sarajevo. Nick, what's the Bosnian government's main complaint?
Peter, the problem is rooted in the basic principles which were agreed in Geneva on September the 8th. Now, those principles, which were agreed to by the 3 parties, provided that Bosnia should remain as a sovereign nation, but that it should be divided into 2 entities. Bosnia-Herzegovina for the Bosnians and Croats, Republika Srpska for the Bosnian Serbs. And it was further agreed in Geneva that both these entities would have the right to establish special relationships with neighbouring countries. Now, the Bosnians feel that this poses the threat of Republika Srpska establishing a special relationship with Serbia itself, which would in fact become Greater Serbia, the overall entity to which the Bosnians have all along been absolutely determined to resist, and which they now feel is a threat to the sovereignty of Bosnia itself.
Nicholas Witchell in Sarajevo, thank you very much. Scotland Yard has launched a new investigation into the murder of Julie Ward, the British tourist killed in Kenya 7 years ago. They're considering new evidence after speaking to a man who says he witnessed her murder in the Masai Mara game park.
A tourist travelling through Kenya's spectacular Masai Mara game park, Julie Ward was at first thought to have been killed by wild animals. 7 years on, the Kenyan authorities accept she was murdered. Now, one of those allegedly present at her killing has spoken out. A former secret policeman, he says Julie was tortured and bludgeoned to death after stumbling across a secret police training camp. To unravel the mystery of his daughter's death, Julie's father has made numerous trips to Kenya. It was during one of these that he was put in touch with this apparent eyewitness to her murder.
I have personally checked out all the detail of his statement over a period of best part of 6 months, and I can't fault it. It's just there's something about the guy that I'm just a little concerned.